All right, we're doing it live. Doing it live.
Let's do it.
All right. So, hello and welcome to another episode of With Enough Prep Time. Very, very different kind of episode today. We're going to be capturing history as such. As two black guys, I think, from very different walks of life. Me and JG Shaolin, me the Nerd Man and JG Shaolin here. Just wanted to look at this case and see. I don't know about you, but I've always tried to keep an open mind during this case. What is your what is your approach been, JG Shaolin?
Well, historically speaking, when it comes to historically speaking, when it comes to the American judicial process, and in regards to matters like this, I can't keep an open mind because even when it's been so apparent that it should go one way, it goes the other way. That's just from my experience.
Which, I mean, look, to be fair to the American criminal justice system, you're supposed to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a quite hard standard to overcome. But it seems like when it's a black defendant who is part of a shooting, or even just a poor defendant, not even, let's say, just a black defendant, but just a poor defendant, this standard of beyond a reasonable doubt just doesn't apply. It only applies, it seems, when it's a police officer in the United States, that you actually get a proper reasonable doubt case. Do you see what I mean? Like that standard that you're innocent until proven guilty doesn't apply to the poor. But it does apply, and it doesn't even apply to the rich sometimes, to be fair. But it systematically has applied to the police force.
I agree. I had an uncle who was a retired police officer, and growing up, he told me a lot about the police force and what to do and what not to do and what to expect and not expect, right? Especially in regards to race. And so we like to say, the justice system is blind, but to quote A Time to Kill, these are human eyes, right? Humans make the justice system. Humans are police officers. So we can't assume that, like this case that we're going to talk about today, we can't assume that he's a police officer and he had no ill will, no evil intent regards to race or whatever. You can't assume that. Logically, you want to believe it, but through, especially my experience.
I mean, I wanted to talk to you specifically because I'm from the UK, and you're from America, so it's a really there's a really big kind of difference in our kind of feelings. I mean, I saw with my eyes what happened, and I was pretty. All I'm saying is, when I say I want to be objective about things, is that I don't try and look at it from the perspective of, they're police, they're racist, they're, doing this terrible thing because they're this, and the systematic racism. That's true independently of the facts of a singular case. But what is astonishing to me is what makes me feel that it's hard to be objective about these kind of cases is how many of them come down in the favor of the police. The standard to which a policeman seems to be able to be convicted of one of these crimes just seems way, way too high. That's the problem. Like they're talking about police officers in this case. They're like, what a reasonable police officer will do in a reasonable situation. And tons of police have come out and said, obviously, this isn't reasonable for Minneapolis police to do. But even what's reasonable for a police officer to do in these situations seems a lot more power than an individual should have. So speaking of that, what do you think now of, just as a part of the atmosphere in America? What's been going on for you in terms of the recent shooting of, I can't remember the man's full name. It's something Wright. He was shot by a female
I forget
police
his name.
officer.
Yeah. Well, it's a divide like it always is, in America anyway, from my perspective. You have the African American community that will say one thing, and then you have I hate to say that white community, but as a whole, they're not individually, but as a whole, will say a completely other thing, right? And I'll give you the example of something. I was at a Baskin Robbins one day, and this is right when the Black Lives Matter was protesting, right when the George Floyd thing initially happened. And you had the protests and everything going on. And I was in Baskin Robbins, and of course, COVID. If it was too crowded inside, you had to wait in line outside of the stores. And I was behind two white couples. And of course, they were talking and talking and talking. And this one gentleman says, he doesn't understand all the things going on with COVID. He believes that it's going overboard. Then the other gentleman said, I agree, just like these protests. Like it makes no sense. Then his wife stopped him because I was behind him. Right? Had I not been behind him as a black man or as African American, period, tell him what he would have went on and said. Then he goes on to, oh, I'm sorry. Like, no, you're not sorry. You're probably sorry I heard what you said. But that's an example of the divide that's going on with trials like this, situations like this. For us as African American people in America, it's just another day in office. We deal with this a lot. Maybe not so much as being murdered, but there has been a lot of cases of police assault, brutality, stuff like that. And I think we did on the stream before with Philosophical Pickle when I said, hey, I was washing my car in my driveway, was approached by several people asking me, do I live there? Right? And it's not indicative of everyone.
It kind of reminds me of something that I was talking to Philosophical Pickle about, which was, about the attitude towards when President Obama became president, how that a lot of attitudes kind of it galvanized support towards Donald Trump and his policies, or sorry, not his policies, but Donald Trump as a figure, as a personality. A lot of support came around the fact that people weren't happy with somebody like President Obama, right? And it almost radicalized even more certain elements of the voting body. And we were discussing this, and I actually forgot, because he was saying, yeah, but that's only a small amount of them, and that's not really, and it is a small amount of them. But one thing I forgot was that President Trump was going after Obama to say that he wasn't American. Do you remember that?
Yep.
So, again, when I was saying about taking these jobs, that are traditionally, supposedly have been taken by white Americans, there is got to be a kind of hesitation or whatever for a black person to do that. They must be worried about that situation. I mean, you just have to look at all the black leaders who have been gunned down, even JFK and Robert Kennedy, who were gunned down just for supporting the civil rights movement. So of course a black president, would be concerned about that kind of thing. And we were talking about Captain America, which is kind of trivial in relation to this, but I think those things would be something of concern. But yeah, going back to what you were saying about like being stopped on the driveway, actually, sorry, just tell me, what do you think about that? Because we were talking about the President Trump, like why President Trump became so popular, and a part of his, cult of personality was the fact that he was challenging things like whether, you know, President Obama was born here, whether he was an American citizen or whether he came from, I think it was Kenya. He was saying he was from.
Yeah, I think his dad's from Kenya. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your thoughts in relation to what you were talking about before? You were saying that white people sometimes it's like they seem to have a blind spot for, because I think they presume, you know, I'm not racist. That means they're very suspicious of when people, you know, say like, hey, you know, some people voted for Donald Trump because they're fucking racist, and they felt like he was their guy. You know, you might have voted for him because for some reason you liked his policies. I don't understand that necessarily, but that may be the reason you voted for him. But there are actual people who voted for President Trump because they're just fucking racist, and they enjoyed his kind of rhetoric, and they enjoyed that he was, you know, saying, you know, that, hey, is President Obama even really American? You know, that's the kind of thing, that's their bread and butter. That's what they've been, you know, they've been waiting for, kind of thing. You know, a president like who speaks and thinks like us, you know.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And so what do you think of that in relation to it's this kind of denial, I think, by certain parts of the white community that are, I believe genuinely aren't, you know, racist necessarily, but they're unwilling they're more willing to condemn what they perceive as, you know, an attack against them than to actually call out the racism within, you know, within the this white this ultimately white system, right? Like, they're unwilling to call out the racism within the police. They want to find excuses. They want to find reasons. They want to find all this, and it's going to come into what I'm going to talk about with George Floyd. But just if you could tell me, do you understand my point? And do you?
Yeah. No, it's and for anybody listening, know what we're talking about. We're not saying it's indicative of all white people, right? Which, because there are this minority of people who are very vocal, and they're the ones who usually get all the airtime, right? Just like when we talk about the Snyder situation, it's a small minority of toxic people, but that small minority is very vocal, they're very loud, right? And so when we talk about
not criticized.
You kind of breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, got me. Am I back on again?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, and
but they're not criticized. The point is, they're not criticized by other white people who are you know, certain white people do criticize them, but there's a large majority who just want to ignore that they exist. You know, they want to ignore that toxicity, and they want to say, oh no, but we're just, you know, we wouldn't do that. You know, we wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, yeah. So,
like, for me, Barack Obama being elected president, which to me was assigned to those certain white people, if you want to call it that. Man, we don't like change in the sense of, we don't like change where our powers being shifted away from us, right? You see the influx of immigrants, right? Because America's always had like a slave culture, in a sense, where you had the Asian community who was somewhat of a slave culture. You had African Americans, of course, with slave culture. The Latin community now can be considered that slave culture, and it's so much, it's becoming a melting pot of people from other cultural backgrounds coming in, and that can be fearful if you're a person of power, right? And I think Joe Biden had a meeting with black leaders in which he said, and I don't want to quote him, but he stated, you know, hey, by 2040, whites are going to be the minority, so you guys need to be trying to partner up with them, right? And so
Biden said that.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to it.
Okay.
And so this is fear, right? It's fear. And what Trump did, he spoke to that fear.
Right.
He spoke to the fear of, okay, small towns, you are the heart of this country, right? And you see a lot of small towns in the news losing money, losing people, losing jobs, and it's in the excuse is, hey, the Black community, they're coming in and they're taking your jobs, right?
Right, exactly. But and meanwhile, he's the guy who's given the most corporate tax breaks ever in the country, which is a complete assault, on the working the working majority, right? So
Exactly.
it's completely a contradiction. It was all a veil.
Yeah, and I can't speak to the UK and all this stuff. I don't know how things are there, but as far as America, and I have to say it, we don't like to read shit. We like to be told what's going on. We don't want to read and research for ourselves as a whole. So whatever smokescreen, whatever veil they throw in front of us, we're gonna go with it.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I want to get back onto this case because the reason I was like I wanted to ask you a few things before we start this because the actual thing has started, so we want to start reacting very soon. But before, I wanted to ask you, first of all, how you feel about the fact that the arguments that George Floyd, for instance, had a drug overdose are so popularized. How do you feel about that as an American Black man? I don't know how to experience that. I would say that before this case started, I was open to the idea of them proving to me how George Floyd's potential drug overdose is relevant to this case. And they haven't proven that. And in my opinion, they haven't proven why it's relevant. And I'll explain why after I've asked you the reaction. And the second thing, that is even more important is that, what was I going to say now? All right, speak, and then tell me what you think of that. So many people are really, really highly supportive of this idea of the George Floyd drug overdose theory. And how do you feel as the defense? I was open-minded. I was objective to the defense proving that this was relevant. I don't think they have, but what do you think of that? That first kind of.
Well, for me, I was never objective about that at all because no matter, because he wasn't physically harming anybody. He wasn't wielding a weapon. He wasn't doing anything that was physically harmful to anyone else, right? From what I saw. And you have 3 police officers maybe, and you couldn't bring down one guy, and the one guy there was no excuse for you kneeling on his neck, him saying, I can't breathe. And you're seeing him look down at him and put more pressure on his neck as he keeps saying, I can't breathe. And so even if I was the defense, you got to use whatever you can to win that case, right?
Yeah, the defense has been pretty good in terms of his ability to kind of twist the narrative. I think he's been pretty good, but I think somewhere in day 3, day 4, he really started to lose momentum, in my opinion. I think it was just before I can't remember who the witness was, but it was just before the pulmonary expert, the breathing expert came on. Whoever that particular witness was, he really lost steam there because the prosecution came in and really dinged him on that. But then afterwards, that pulmonary breathing expert was a real disaster for his case, I believe.
Yeah.
And then there was a few others that just in a row, he couldn't really say anything. And then you look at the defense that he put up. He's only called one medical expert. he's only called one use of force expert and then a few other witnesses or whatever. So I don't think he's put on a very strong rebuttal case to the prosecution because he couldn't find experts who would be willing to testify to what he wanted. And for me, how would I say this? The fact that he couldn't do that is very telling. And I'm shocked that there are still people out there trying to justify this notion that George Floyd possibly had a drug overdose. I think it was proven almost in court that he didn't. Like, basically what they said was that if you look at the symptoms of a drug overdose, he wasn't displaying the symptoms of a drug overdose. Shortness of breath, like basically all the things that you would say for that somebody was having during a drug overdose, like the sleepiness, the tiredness, the whatever, wasn't something that he was that was happening to him while he was being subdued in this prone position.
And I think what the defense is doing is trying to create some form of doubt in a juror's mind, right? That's because in my heart of hearts, I believe that the defense knows, okay, we don't really have anything to go with, but what we can do is try to create some doubt in the mind of one or two people. And I think that's the whole focus at this point. And we've seen in history of American judicial system where we've had experts who've gone up and lied, right, for the sake of the defense or for the sake of the prosecution.
Well, the expert,
and I don't believe this is happening, but
the expert that they got, which was the medical expert, the South African guy, is being sued by another person for basically and I don't know, again, this is why I said the prosecution have been a bit weak. Either the judge didn't allow this line of questioning, or the prosecution are very weak, because he's being sued in another case. I think the use of force expert or the medical expert. I think it might be the medical expert. No, I think they're both being sued. Yeah, and actually, now I think about it, look, so there was one, the use of force expert, basically, a guy was shot in the back 12 times.
Yeah.
And he said it was a reasonable use of force. And basically, it kind of turned out that it absolutely wasn't, like, by the standard textbooks, a reasonable use of force. So it was 12 times the guy was shot in the back, essentially. And so that was a controversial thing for him. So I don't know why the prosecution didn't bring that up at all. When they were cross-examining him, like, former cases should be able to be brought up unless the judge says that they can't be brought up. And then the medical expert, there was something else that happened with him, that he's being definitely sued for something, and I can't remember what it is. So it's again, I think the prosecution could have gone in harder if these guys have past situations where they've testified in cases and it's turned out very badly for them.
Yeah, and it's like we talked about, logically speaking, you would think that he would get second degree homicide, but just historically, when we look at cases like these, when it's involving an African American, it goes a different direction, right? But for me, you have to give him second degree homicide because we've seen a case prior to this where a black officer accidentally shot this white lady and killed her because they were called to a scene, and he thought that, hey, He was looking out for his partner and thought that she might have been trying to attack his partner or something. And he was, I think, what, 10, 12 years or something like that. I'm not sure. We got to the link I have to
Right,
pull up.
right.
So
And I was gonna,
you have to. Because if you don't, you might see protests beyond what we've seen since the civil rights movement.
well, I'm sure we will, but I don't. I hope not. It would be kind of deserved because I just think it's been proven. Like, really, in this case, it was really proven by the video, by the use of force experts. He acted in a way that was against. So let me put it this way, because I have an analogy that I want to use for this case and why I wasn't convinced by this case, like the defense's position at all. And I think if the defense are allowed to argue this, that the law actually needs to be changed, right? So let me say I pushed an old lady down the stairs, right? So I push her down the stairs. Let's say I was running down the stairs and everyone was telling me, hey, there's an old lady that lives on the second floor. Don't just run down the stairs because you could hurt her. And everyone was telling me this as I was running down. Like 5, 6 people told me this. And then I run down the stairs and then I look at her. Somebody even sees me look at her, and I just run and I shoulder into her, and she flies down the stairs. And during that time, I don't know, her heart gives out, right? Or something like that, and she dies. What is that? What is that? Is that just manslaughter? Because if that's manslaughter in the law, I think the law needs to change. That's a good
analogy.
That should be second-degree homicide. You can't say that the old woman died of old age because I, smashed into her and I did something physically to her that led to complications in her own body, right? Most of the people that police interact with are going to be people that may be on drugs or may have a drug issue or drug problem or may have, I'm sure, dude, I don't do drugs, but I'm sure if they look through my body, I probably have some heart fucking problems. I probably have high blood pressure and all of these kind of stuff. Are you going to say if someone sticks a knee on my neck that, my heart gives out, say that, that is, that's my fault because of my own, I eat badly, I don't understand what possible relevance that has,
Exactly. And logically, you are correct. And I agree with you 100%. At the same time, I mean, and I hate to bring it about race, right? And I hate to do it, but
why?
Yeah, if the old lady pushed down the stairs and she was white, you might have a different outcome as opposed to she was just a regular black lady. You know what I mean? And so I never want to throw race into the judicial system or politics, but it's apparently there. You know what I mean? And it's a sad situation, right? And it is a situation that shouldn't have happened. Point blank, period.
What I like about what the prosecution. Sorry, go on, finish, please.
Oh, I lost train of thought. Go ahead.
I was going to say what I like about what the prosecution did in this case is that they didn't bring up race. They really didn't. They didn't make it a hate crime. They didn't bring up any kind of racism that Derek Chauvin might harbor. They just looked at it as a human being with a human being and what this man did. And I think that helped a lot. Their presentation of the case and the presentation of the facts. But again, I mean, my main issue, when it comes down to it, is the point at which, even by the standard of law, the high standard of law that this defense lawyer is trying to pull and I think it might work. That's my worry. I think it might work on one of these jurors. But the high standard of law that they're trying to place upon what a reasonable officer will do in a reasonable, thing, All of it has been knocked down and shown to be bullshit, right?
Yeah.
But even by his standard, and this is what I want the prosecution to keep nailing this in. Why did he continue kneeling on him? And why did he not provide CPR at the point in which the guy said he hasn't got a pulse? The other police officer said he doesn't have a pulse. That is my main question in this whole case. That at that point it became a homicide, because whatever you want to say about what was happening before, he didn't know, he didn't understand, he understood. He was kneeling on a pulseless man's neck at that point, and he had sufficient training. Not that you need training, you just need fucking common sense. But he had sufficient training to know that every minute that he continues to not give this man life-saving, help, assistance, medical aid or medical care, succor, if you will. Every minute that he doesn't means it's less likely that he's going to live through this situation. He knew that when he became pulseless. Also, in terms of de-escalating the situation, that would have been the thing to de-escalate. To take the knee off the neck would have de-escalated whatever threat that he supposedly perceived from the crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the threat by the 7-8-year-old girl with a love t-shirt on, right? That threat was being encouraged. It was being, it was a direct result of what he was doing, right? So again, him starting to provide CPR would have alleviated the concerns of the onlookers a bit. They may have still continued shouting, being angry, but in general, I think they would have been like, okay, let him do his thing and give this man CPR or whatever he can do to help save his life. So again, I don't understand those 3 minutes, and I really need this fucking prosecution, because if they don't do this, I promise you this case might go to the defense. They need to hammer in that 3 fucking minutes that he still kneeled on his neck after
I agree.
the pulselessness. And I don't think they've done it so far.
And one thing I do love what they did was they kept playing the video over and over to keep it in your minds. Like you said, 3 minutes. Like even jiu-jitsu, I know how much pressure to put on someone that can break the arm, that can break the collarbone, that could actually literally kill them, right? If I put too much pressure in certain areas. And as a police officer, a trained police officer, you don't even have to be trained to know that if I put my knee on this person's neck for especially 3 minutes, it can kill them. That's just common sense.
It's like saying, look, again, I'll give you another analogy. Let's say somebody in the middle of the street was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
Right? And some cops came along, put them on the floor, put them on in this prone position, like supine, put them on that position, and then put their full body or put their body weight on their back, their legs, and on their neck. Would you say that person, would you call that death by heart attack, or was that a homicide? Because again, I don't know the law. I'm trying to rationalize how you call that. Do you understand my scenario there?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you see someone having a heart attack right in the middle of the street. So somebody's having a heart attack in the middle of the street. 3 police officers, or let's say 3 civilians, come along, put that person on the ground, put them, chest down, kneel on their back, kneel on their legs, and then put their knee on the person's neck while they're having this supposed heart attack, right?
Yeah. That's homicide. That's a homicide.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, unless I'm going crazy, that's not, you can't, if you're literally, even if somebody is in medical distress and you then go and try and make it worse, right?
Yeah.
You still have responsibility for their death, because that person who's having that heart attack with the right medical care immediately would have been able to survive, possibly, right?
Possibly, yeah.
Right. So even if, let's say, George Floyd was having a fucking heart attack, he was having a drug overdose, he was having whatever you want to say, is the appropriate thing to do to somebody in that situation to kneel on their neck and their back? And they knew, you can say, oh, maybe they didn't know he was in medical distress. But as soon as they checked his pulse and that pulse wasn't there, they knew he was in medical distress. So they have no fucking case, in my opinion, unless the law is ridiculous. Because the law,
it's very ridiculous.
The law that says you can go to somebody in medical distress and make it like you see somebody's been stabbed in the street. They're stabbed. They're on the verge of life or death, right? And you're somebody with a duty of care towards them, right? So you're let's say a paramedic, right?
Yeah.
And you walk up to that person and you just stand there and watch them bleed out. And in fact, you not only do that, you just go, you're such a psychopath that you actually turn them around, right, to a position that you know that they'll bleed out quicker, right?
Yeah.
Think of that scenario, right? How much criminal responsibility does that person have for the death of the person who's been stabbed?
Over 90%.
Right, exactly.
The reason why I say over 90%, because you got to look at where was this person stabbed, right? How long has that person been lying there stabbed? There's a lot of contributing factors, and I think that's what the defense is trying to do. It's a contributing factor. Yeah, he might have had an overdose, but he was on drugs, and that was a contributing factor, right? And that's what they're trying to beat into the head of the juror, right? That he's going to get charged with something. That's just what's going to happen. The problem is it going to be secondary homicide or is it going to be manslaughter?
I think it's going to be secondary homicide. What we're going to do is we're going to start the trial. My food has come, so we're going to start the trial, and good conversation to start off. All right, I'm going to get my food quickly. So, can you hear everything?
You got on mute.
Going to give you some instructions.
Yeah, I got it.
Hello, sorry about that. Hi.
Your seat.
You there?
In fact, I would encourage that you follow along.
Yeah, you're upstairs.
There will be a point where I'll ask you to put the remaining instructions under your chair
I'll
so you can listen
come
to the
on.
closing arguments of counsel.
Yeah, down here.
Members of the jury, I instruct you as follows. It is your duty to decide the questions of fact in this case. It is my duty to give you the rules of law that you must apply in arriving at your verdict. You have now heard the evidence, and soon you'll hear the arguments of counsel. At this time, I will instruct you in the law applicable to this case. You must follow and apply the rules of law as I give them to you, even if you believe the law is or should be different. You have each been given a copy of these instructions to follow along as I read, and you may take your copy with you when you retire to the jury room. Nevertheless, you should listen carefully and attentively as I read them to you now. Note that the titles of the individual sections of these instructions are not a part of the instructions, but merely placed as headings to assist you in finding a topic. Deciding questions of fact is your exclusive responsibility. In doing so, you must consider all the evidence you have heard and seen in this trial, and you must disregard anything that you may have heard or seen elsewhere about this case. I have not, by these instructions, nor by any ruling or expression during the trial, intended to indicate my opinion regarding the facts or the outcome of this case. If I have said or done anything that would seem to indicate such an opinion, you are to disregard it.
By the way, I don't like this judge.
You must consider these.
No, he ignored me already.
He pretends to be quite friendly and whatever, but he's been ruling massively in favor of the defense the whole time, and judges never do that. They always rule in favor of the prosecution.
The defendant is presumed innocent of the charges made. This presumption remains.
And I think that's bad as well. I think when judges rule in favor of any side more, that shows a lot of bias.
Has been brought before the court.
Yeah.
By the ordinary processes of the law and is on trial, should not be considered by you in any way suggesting guilt. The burden of proving guilt is on the state. The defendant does not have to prove his innocence. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. It does not mean a fanciful or capricious doubt, nor does it mean beyond all possibility of doubt. A fact may be proven by either direct or circumstantial evidence or by both. The law does not prefer one form of evidence over the other. A fact is proven by direct evidence when, for example, it is proven by witnesses who testify as to what they saw,
I can't hear.
or experienced.
What's the music in the background?
Oh, that's Coco. I'm turning it down. So I'm gonna keep her calm.
Circumstantial evidence when its existence can be reasonably inferred from other facts proven in the case. For example, if a person watches deer crossing a snow-covered field, the person has direct evidence of deer walking in the field because the person sees it. If the person does not see deer but finds deer tracks in the snow, the deer tracks are circumstantial evidence that deer walked in the field because that factual conclusion can reasonably be inferred from the tracks found in the snow. Now, attorneys are officers of the court. It is their duty to make objections they think proper and to argue their client's cause. However, the arguments or other remarks of an attorney are not evidence. If the attorneys or I have made or should make any statement as to what the evidence is that differs from your recollection of the evidence, you should disregard the statement and rely solely on your own memory. If an attorney's argument contains any statement of the law that differs from the law I give you, disregard the attorney's statement. The state has brought 3 charges or counts against the defendant.
Has he given his definition of homicide on what he's saying as
consider the evidence applicable to each count as
the
only accusation before,
because that's the important thing. What he gives the jury in terms of what is
uninfluenced by
each charge mean.
Any other count or counts is in favor of or against the defendant. The defendant may be found guilty or not guilty of any or all of the offenses charged, depending on the evidence and the weight you give it under the court's instructions. I'm about to instruct you on the law that you are to apply to the charges in the defense, but before doing so, I am going to define a few words and phrases that appear more than once in the elements of the charges and the defense that follow. The words and phrases being defined are bolded in the written copy of the instructions you will be receiving. You should use these definitions for these words and phrases in your deliberation. Attempted means that the defendant did an act which was a substantial step toward and more than mere preparation for causing the result, and that the defendant did that act with intent to cause that result. There are several forms of bodily harm relevant to some of the charges or the defense. Bodily harm means physical pain or injury, illness, or any impairment of a person's physical condition. Substantial bodily harm means bodily harm that involves a temporary but substantial disfigurement, that causes a temporary but substantial loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ, or that causes a fracture of any bodily member. Great bodily harm means bodily injury that creates a high probability of death, that causes serious permanent disfigurement, or that causes a permanent or protracted loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ, or other serious bodily harm. To cause death, causing death, or caused the death means that the defendant's act or acts were a substantial causal factor in causing the death of George Floyd. The defendant is criminally liable for all the consequences of his actions that occur in the ordinary and natural course of events, including those consequences brought about by one or more intervening causes, if such intervening causes were the natural result of the defendant's acts. The fact that other causes contribute to the death does not relieve the defendant of criminal liability.
Good.
However, the defendant is not criminally liable if a superseding cause caused the death. A superseding cause.
You heard that superseding cause? Now I think that's what the defense was trying to say. Or drugs, drug overdose.
The sole cause of
That's what they're trying to say, but it depends on his definition here.
Yeah.
To know, to have knowledge, or knew requires only that the defendant believes that the specified facts exist. Intentionally or intentional means that the defendant either has a purpose to do the thing or cause the result specified, or believes that the act performed, if successful, will cause the result. In addition, the defendant must have knowledge of those facts that are necessary to make his conduct criminal and that are set forth after the word intentionally or intentional. With intent that, with intent to, or intended, means that the defendant either has a purpose to do the thing.
You can ask me to pause it whenever you want.
Or believes that
if you want to talk about
if
something.
Successful will cause that result. It is not necessary that the defendant have this intent in advance. The necessary intent can develop during the commission of the act. Police officer means an employee of a law enforcement agency who is licensed by the Board of Peace Officer Standards and Training, charged with the prevention and detection of crime and the enforcement of the general criminal laws of the state of Minnesota, and who has the full power of arrest. A law enforcement agency is a unit of state or local government that is authorized by law to grant full powers of arrest and to charge a person with the duties of preventing and detecting crime and enforcing the general criminal laws of the state of Minnesota. The Minneapolis Police Department is a law enforcement agency for these purposes. The definition of any word or phrase with a specific legal meaning that appears only once in the elements or the defenses will be defined where it appears later in these instructions. The defendant is charged in count 1 with murder in the second degree in connection with the death of George Floyd. Under Minnesota law, a person causing the death of another without intent to cause the death of any person, while committing or attempting to commit a felony offense, is guilty of the crime of murder in the second degree. The defendant is charged with committing this crime or intentionally aiding the commission of this crime. The elements of the crime of murder in the second degree while committing a felony are: first element, the death of George Floyd must be proven. Second element, the defendant caused the death of George Floyd. Third element, the defendant at the time of causing the death of George Floyd was committing or attempting to commit the felony offense of assault in the third degree. It is not necessary for the state to prove the defendant had an intent to kill George Floyd, but it must prove that the defendant committed or attempted to commit the underlying felony of assault in the third degree. There are two elements of assault in the third degree. First, defendant assaulted George Floyd. Assault is the intentional infliction of bodily harm upon another, or the attempt to inflict bodily harm upon another. The intentional infliction of bodily harm requires proof that the defendant intentionally applied unlawful force to another person without that person's consent, and that this act resulted in bodily harm.
Okay, that's good.
Second, defendant
That's good for
substantial
the
bodily harm on
prosecution.
George Floyd.
Yeah.
It is not necessary for the state to prove that the defendant intended to inflict substantial bodily harm or knew that his actions would inflict substantial bodily harm. Only that the defendant intended to commit the assault and that George Floyd sustained substantial bodily harm as a result of the assault. Fourth element, the defendant's act took place on or about May 25th, 2020 in Hennepin County. If you find that each of these elements has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is guilty of this charge. If you find that any of the elements have not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is not guilty of this charge, unless you find the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is liable for this crime committed by another person or persons according to the instructions below that are listed on page 8 under the heading Liability for Crimes of Another. The defendant is charged in count 2 with murder in the third degree in connection with the death of George Floyd. Under Minnesota law, a person causing the death of another by perpetrating an act dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life, but without intent to cause the death of any person, is guilty of murder in the third degree. The defendant is charged with committing this crime or intentionally aiding the commission of this crime. The elements of the crime of murder in the third degree are: first element, the death of George Floyd must be proven. Second element, the defendant caused the death of George Floyd. Third element, the defendant caused the death of George Floyd by an intentional act that was eminently dangerous to other persons. A person commits an act eminently dangerous to others when the act is highly likely to cause death. Fourth element, defendant acted with a mental state consisting of reckless disregard for human life. The defendant's act may not have been specifically intended to cause death and may not have been specifically directed at the particular person whose death occurred, but must have been committed with a conscious indifference to the loss of life that the eminently dangerous act could cause.
That's going to be important.
Fifth element.
Mm-hmm.
Defendant's act took place on
I'll tell you why.
25th, 2020 in Hennepin County. If you find that each of these elements,
What he said just there, is really important, because that means that they can keep on hammering that 3 minutes that after George Floyd was pulseless, after they checked his pulse. What he said just there, they can hang him on that, because it's basically, they just need to go, well, you know, he didn't have a pulse and he continued kneeling on his neck. What would be the possible reason of him doing that after the man didn't have a pulse? And you know, there's not much that I think the defense can say. I wouldn't be shocked if this comes away with an acquittal. But at the same time, that's because I think there will be people who came in with the attitude on the jury that they were, that almost that this, you know, that basically, you know, they're pro cops or something like that, and it would be very hard for you to suggest that a cop committed a crime, you know. So they already have that inbuilt attitude, because none of the facts presented in this case support anything except like a really, really inhuman use of force on George Floyd. Anyway, I'm gonna play again unless you have something to say.
I agree with everything you said. Everything.
Has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is guilty of this charge. If you find that any of these elements has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is not guilty of this charge, unless you find the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is liable for this crime committed by another person or persons, according to the instructions that are listed on page 8, under the heading Liability for Crimes of Another. The defendant is charged in count 3 with manslaughter in the second degree in connection with the death of George Floyd. Under Minnesota law, whoever by culpable negligence, whereby he creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes the chance of causing death or great bodily harm to another person, causes the death of another, is guilty of murder of manslaughter in the second degree. The defendant is charged with committing this crime or intentionally aiding the commission of this crime. The elements of manslaughter in the second degree are: first element, the death of George Floyd must be proven. Second element, the defendant caused the death of George Floyd by culpable negligence, whereby the defendant created an unreasonable risk and consciously took a chance of causing death or great bodily harm. Culpable negligence is intentional conduct that the defendant may not have intended to be harmful, but that an ordinary and reasonably prudent person would recognize as involving a strong probability of injury to others. Third element.
This has been proven.
Took place on or about May 25th,
Prosecution proved all of this. It's up to the jury.
If you find that each of these elements has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is guilty of this charge. If you find that any of these elements has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is not guilty of this charge, unless you find the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is liable for this crime committed by another person or persons.
I remember what I was going to say earlier about this judge.
Yeah.
So the judge allowed in basically the judge allowed in a former arrest by George Floyd, where he was he basically had a drug overdose.
Mm-hmm.
Or not a drug overdose. He basically, I think he did have a drug overdose, or something had happened to him anyway. But you know, he was being seen by, you know, the paramedic, and you know, the police had to use some force on him or whatever. So he allowed that in. Fair to him on a very, very limited perspective, because he said that he didn't want to, you know, He didn't want the jury to form any attitude towards George Floyd because of this. It was only supposed to go towards like his medical health or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Complete nonsense. Because once you open that box, it's like, all right, this guy's just a frequent drug user, and he's always, he always has the same temperament when police come and, basically come up to him and ask him, whatever, like they're trying to arrest him or whatever they're trying to do. Whenever police are interacting with him, he always has this same attitude. So that did highly prejudice George Floyd, because I didn't see what relevance it had, because the circumstances were quite different. His response was quite different. It didn't show a pattern of behavior because it had only happened once before. It was really, really prejudicial to George Floyd. Now, Derek Chauvin has had a number of complaints, not just one incident. Like George Floyd had one incident of drug overdose, where it was different circumstances. The police treated him completely different. He turned out to be alive. He didn't stop breathing. Had no heart complications. Nothing happened like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that happened was that he was a bit like, officer, I don't think he said I can't breathe or anything like that. He just was like sleepy or something like that, and the officer was trying to rouse him and put his gun out, obviously, like they always do. But anyway, so that happened. Then Derek Chauvin had not one, not two, I think about 3 or 4 complaints about use of force against him. Judge didn't allow that in.
Oh, wow.
So that to me is an incredible, I mean, I didn't go, and I should have watched the arguments for it, because, really you should. It's not fair to just, claim that the judge is being, not fair to both parties, without actually listening to the arguments and what his reasoning was for not allowing that evidence in. But he basically said he'll only allow the evidence, to impeach Derek Chauvin on his use of force before, if Derek Chauvin takes the stand, which he was never going to do. He was never, ever going to take the stand in his own defense. That was never going to happen. So the fact that they didn't allow that to be as a possible impeachment of Derek Chauvin, okay, fair enough. You are innocent until proven guilty. You don't want to prejudice be prejudicial towards any party. But why would he allow what happened with George Floyd in for a limited purpose, even when he wouldn't allow any of that in? I just find that I'd love to see the arguments for why, the litigation process for why he decided that one of those one person's past history can come in, but Derek Chauvin's can't come in.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, right there. It's just when you put it like that, in those situations that happen, you can't help but feel that the judge is being prejudiced. You can't help but feel that. It's like, look, you allow the defense to use whatever tools they can, but you won't allow the prosecution to use whatever tools they can. Right? And going over the Chauvin thing, this past history, would be key for just putting the cherry on top. It's like, look, he showed negligence. He showed ill intentions based on his history of assault. It's like we said, logically speaking, second-degree homicide, case closed. Let's get out of here.
Yeah,
but because they used that one incident with George Floyd of a drug situation, we live in a society where once you do it once, that's all you ever are.
Yeah.
Once a wolf, always a wolf. So I'm going to say that probably is going to create some doubt in some juror's mind, because the judge keeps hammering beyond a reasonable doubt. And because of
Well,
that,
it is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's fair. I don't think you should be like, you do not want a criminal justice system that works in a way that you aren't innocent until proven guilty. I mean, you should be. There's no doubt to me about that. I think that Derek Chauvin should have a fair trial. We should all have been open-minded to the facts of the case, to look what are the criminal charges, because it may have been that it's not Derek Chauvin, but the actual law or the police department training that was at fault, rather than Derek Chauvin himself. I mean, he's always going to be responsible, but I'm talking from a morally responsible for the reprehensible behavior. But I'm talking from a legal standpoint. If the Minnesota PD was teaching these kind of tactics, there's certain things that could have come in that you would say, okay, well, as disgusting as a human being as Derek Chauvin is, if he was trained like this, if he was taught to do this, if he was, this is something that the police allow for, and that other police have done before, or then you could say that, okay, the charge should at least be lesser than homicide, because now we have to start looking at the police department, and now we have to start firing and maybe bringing criminal charges. That's what I would do. I would bring criminal charges on the people who formulated such training, and allowed sent police officers out there. I think that would tighten up, what they call systematic racism a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you go, all right, if a police officer uses a use of force, which it turns out that it's trained by the higher ups, by the police force itself, by the local, by the police chief or whatever has signed off on it, then he needs to go to jail for a little bit. He needs to be brought to trial on murder charges if it turns out that these uses of force are excessive and have proven to take the lives of people unnecessarily. I really think that. I think that's the. Yeah, I've come way far from my initial point, but like the point I was trying to make was like that. I think that everybody's entitled to a fair trial, and I think that Derek Chauvin, of course, he's entitled to a fair trial, and facts could have come out in this case. I'm not sure which, but facts could have come out of this case that might have been mitigating circumstances to him that warrant kind of consideration. As I said, it's hard to think what, but there might have been. So I have no problem with the judge upholding those standards, but the problem is they don't uphold those standards to anybody else except for police officers. You see a celebrity in there, they throw a lot of the times, like celebrities or normal people, poor people, they throw the fucking book at them. Right? You are guilty until you're proven innocent in that court of law, usually. And the state has so much resources in comparison with the defense. So, and even in this case, the defense had it. I think they made it look like they had less resources, but it was just one lawyer. He was doing all the work for all the cross-examinations, doing everything. But I think he had help behind doors. I think purpose to make it look like it was a David versus Goliath situation where, you had loads of prosecution lawyers, but only one defense lawyer. But in general, the state just has so much more, think about that. Like usually you have one lawyer representing the defense, and then you might have 2-3 on the prosecution side. And that means they can split up the work, they can divvy up the work, they can do better cross-examinations, they can, do a lot of other things. So in general, as I said, it's only police officers who tend to get this better treatment where the actual law that should apply to all of us, which is you really are innocent until proven guilty. Due process has to be, seen to. They're the only ones who seem to benefit from this way of thinking. Other people are just considered guilty.
Well, I got a few things about that. One was I agree. Everyone should be able to have a fair trial, fair and impartial jury, judged by your peers. Right? That's what should happen.
Yeah.
And it's a saying that the appearance of the law must always be upheld.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, the appearance of the law must always be upheld. So even though by the looks of it, it should be a fair trial, behind the scenes, there can be a lot of unfairness going on. Right? And so, and another thing, and you're right, police officers seem to get all kind of special treatment when it comes to situations like this. But I will point you to a line, and me, I always like to quote movie lines or whatever. In a film Braveheart, after William Wallace's wife was, had her throat slashed, one of the things the guy said was, an attack on a king's soldier is an attack on the king himself. Right? The police department, whether we like it or not, is like a subcategory of the U.S. government. Right? They are probably the lower spectrum of it, but they're still part of it. And so because of that, and you have the police department, which, if those are tactics that are the police are trained with, if you're a police department, I don't want that. I don't want to be known to be that. Right? I don't want that to look bad upon me. Mm-hmm. So we got to do whatever we can. Number one, take the focus off the training, if we are training our officers to be that way. And two, hey, we are a police department. We're out there for your safety, right? We're out there for your safety and well-being. And using that narrative of, hey, George Floyd was he got in a situation before, even though it was once.
Police are there to protect privilege and property. They're not there for anything else.
Exactly. That's why
I kind of dislike this whole narrative. Police doing good is incidental. It's not part of the job. How would I put this? There are good police officers, and there are, it's like a bank. Do you know what I mean? There are nice bankers. Right? Good people, decent people who will try and help out as much as they can and be nice. But what is a bank actually there to do? Right? Is a bank there for the interests of the common man? Absolutely fucking not. Same with the police and the criminal justice system. It is not there for the common man. If it happened to help out the common man at a certain point, it is incidental. It's because you found like some cool lawyer who's like hip and wants to turn the law against itself, or a judge who's just an understanding kind of guy, or a police officer who's just a good guy who wants to clean up his own streets or whatever. That's incidental. The point of the police is to protect privilege and property. That's what they're there for.
I agree. But remember, like I said, the appearance of the law must always be upheld.
They don't go into Beverly Hills parties which have loads of drugs and sex workers and all of this shit. They don't bust in there and start whipping ass. They don't do that, because that is privilege, and they're there to protect privilege. They're not there to So as I said, any good, and this is why it's hard to say, because I don't want to say this so ruthlessly, because some policemen are heroes. But just being a police officer, I hate the fact that they're praised as heroic or something like this. It's not I understand that one police officer, it happens to be against the law to, like, for instance, beat the shit out of a woman, right? That happens to be against the law. And absolutely, we need police officers. We need some kind of law or legal system to be able to deal with that. But again, I would say to you, that is not the main... it might be why some police officers get into it. It might be why some police women get into it. They're like, they got into this because they wanted to be in the sex crimes unit, right? Like they wanted to break that apart. And yeah, I consider those individual police officers heroic, right? But just in virtue of being a police officer, you're not heroic. And in fact, I think certain times quite the opposite. I think you're a power-hungry control freak, or not a control freak. How would I say? Like somebody. You're a powerless little man who doesn't, has no, just follows rules for the sake of following rules. You don't think about the rules. You don't think about whether they're wrong or right, or whether they're just or not just. You just follow rules for the sake of following fucking rules, right? And you've been unpopular your whole life because of that. And so you go, oh, I'll join the police force, and then I'll get those guys who made me feel like a fucking, like a nobody all my life. Now I'll have the instruments to impose my will upon those people. There is a lot of police officers who are like that, and it attracts them, and they know who they can abuse, and and they know the poor, the vulnerable, those druggies. Those are the people that they can really impose their will on, right? Whereas they won't do that to druggies in fucking Beverly Hills. They won't do that shit because they know their uncle or their dad or their mother is a lawyer or judge or somebody who will fuck them over. And that's what you were saying, about these. That's why these guys know that they're protecting their privilege. The judge is part of that privilege group, so he knows these police officers are protecting his property and privilege. So of course he's going to have a bias towards them, even if he doesn't realize it. It's an instinct. It's an innate understanding of what they do for those who have privilege and those who have property.
Yeah. And I'll tell you two quick stories real quick that's happened with me in regards to police. Both having to do with license plate tags, mind you. One was a situation where my tags were expired, didn't even know it, didn't realize it, right? Which often happens. And I get pulled over by two white police officers. And of course, they approach the vehicle, ask my license and registration insurance. I give it to him. And he tells me, hey, your license plate tags were expired. I said, oh, sir, I had no idea. I forgot. I was just, just slipped my mind. He says, you mind if I go run you're going to go run my license anyways. Well, it would matter if I mind you running it. So he goes, runs it. I'm looking at it in my rearview mirror, like, why is he taking so damn long? Right. And he comes to my vehicle. He's on one side, his partner's on the other side. He asks me, no, he doesn't ask me, he just tells me, you're making me very nervous because you keep looking at me out of your rearview mirror. I'm like, what? And I told him, point blank period, I'm a young black male put over by two white officers. Both of you have guns. And you're saying I'm making you nervous. Right? And these are the things a lot of them will do. Like, they'll come up with any little thing to say, oh, you're making me nervous. You probably got a warrant on you. You probably got this and that on you. Gonna find out nothing on me, of course. I'm a law-abiding citizen. Another incident, this was during a time when McCain and Palin were running for president way back, and vice president. And I get pulled over. I was leaving a job where I was working a third shift job at time for extra money. And guys put a prank on me where they put Palin McCain stickers all over my car to mess with me, right? And it's like, what, 2, 3 in the morning? I'm not taking that crap. I'm going home. I get pulled over. The officer says I forged my tags. Long story short, it happened to be a felony. I had to go get a lawyer, and the lawyer just looked at it and laughed. And I said, well, why did he put forgery on the ticket or whatever? He says, verbatim, police officers fuck up a lot.
Mm-hmm. What did it have to do with the McCain?
Well, because the stickers were on the tags.
All right, let's see.
And they try to say I forged my tags, right?
Oh, I see.
And so, had I had to just, it's.
I understand.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like I can't speak for what happens in UK with African Americans and with blacks and other
UK.
places.
I've had a number of incidents with police in the UK. I'll tell you about it a little later. But I'll say in general, the UK isn't as bad as America at all. It's a far reach from what's happening in America, so it's very different. I feel like British blacks should be allies to you, and not be out there kind of trying to complain that there's the level of police brutality against them, because they're really, I don't feel that there is. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a young teenager anymore, so I don't know. But I had a number of incidents when I was a teenager, but things in general were much worse in the UK when I was younger. But I think they've got a lot better, put it that way. Not that there needs to be no change. There should be some more change, but that things have got better. But anyway, I'm going to play the thing now. All right.
Okay.
And I'm going to come back.
Following instructions apply to all three of the charges I've just given you. The defendant is guilty of a crime committed by another person or persons only if the defendant has played an intentional role in aiding the commission of that crime and made no reasonable effort to prevent the crime before it was committed. Intentional role includes intentionally aiding, advising, hiring, counseling, conspiring with, or procuring another to commit the crime. The defendant's presence or actions constitute intentionally aiding only if first the defendant knew another person or persons were going to commit or were committing a crime. Second, the defendant intended that his presence or actions aid the commission of that crime. If the defendant intentionally aided another person in committing a crime, or intentionally advised, hired, counseled, conspired with, or otherwise procured the other person or persons to commit it, the defendant is also guilty of any other crime the other person or persons commit while trying to commit the intended crime, if that other crime was reasonably foreseeable to the defendant as a probable consequence of trying to commit the intended crime. The defendant is guilty of the crime under this theory of intentionally aiding in the commission of a crime.
I want a question, just one last question, because I think this is important. What do you think should happen, one, to the other two police officers who were involved in this? Not the Asian guy, the other two who are on the ground with Chauvin. And then secondly, what do you think should happen in this Wright case? I'm going to tell you what I think should happen in the Wright case.
Okay.
Because you know what I mean by the Wright case, right? The guy who was shot. Okay. I believe what that police officer did was terrible. It was definitely a crime, but I think the fact that people are treating her like Derek Chauvin, I think it's bad. I think it's true that we shouldn't take any more of these deaths any longer, but in her case, in her situation, not. I don't know how you accidentally put a gun rather than your taser, because I think they feel quite different, don't they?
Yeah, taser is a lot lighter.
So I think she pulled her gun on purpose, but she just accidentally pulled the trigger, and then she was like, "Oh, my taser," to try and cover it up.
Yeah, right. That's usually the common thing with the taser stuff. We've seen in a lot of cases where officer pulls out taser and he asks me a gun and say, "Oh, I thought it was my taser."
Yeah. Anyway, but I don't buy that necessarily. But I genuinely think that treating her in the same way as Derek Chauvin, I just think we should be careful about the presentation of, as a community. Like, we should be careful about our presentation of these things, because we don't want to come out like, I don't know how to express this. The guy did something that I think was really stupid. And that didn't mean he deserved to die at all. But I'm always going to think about it in some sense, even though I'm not going to compromise at all with these people. But I'm always going to think about it from these people who try and justify these things all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And, should we focus so much on situations like that when this individual's behavior, essentially wasn't what led to his death, didn't deserve it because of it, didn't, whatever because of it, but his behavior meant that he didn't get arrested, like, without being, without harm coming to him. Because that was his choice, to be arrested without harm coming to him, or chaos, to be like, I don't know what's going to happen. Now, again, police, in that chaos, it shouldn't be that we let the police officer off because of that. It should be, that the young black guy should have been aware, should have been cognizant, after everything he's seen on TV, all of the things he's seen on news recently, all of the shootings, that he should be cognizant that that kind of thing might happen to him. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
When he does something like that. And I guess I don't know what I'm saying.
I get where you're going.
But I just feel like that police officer is being treated in a way that, not that she doesn't deserve, but I don't know how to put it. Like, I just don't think we should. The outrage should not be as much as something like George Floyd. It should not be as much as something like the Zimmerman case, or or even Breonna Taylor, right? Those are cases where it's much more clear cut and we can use that. Whereas I think if we put this to the forefront, what people are going to use is, like, you see, they're always resisting, and anyway, that's my basic point. And also that I'm, especially with this case, with the Derek Chauvin case, I'm kind of curious what you think should happen to the other two police officers.
Well, the other two police officers, they should be treated like anybody else would, guilty by association, right? Like, if you and I go to a gas station, you decide to rob it, and we drive off, and police pull us both over, we're both going to jail. I have to prove that I had nothing at all to do with it, or had any knowledge that you were going to do what you were going to do. So I think they should be on trial as well. Like I said, innocent till proven guilty, because I don't want to judge.
He did ask, should we pull him over?
Yeah,
the officer asked that, and then he went in and he tried to give George Floyd CPR.
Yeah.
Even though it was after, but I think Derek Chauvin was the highest ranking officer in that situation. They just started on the police force for the last 2 days.
Okay, well, I'll give you a scenario. The same scenario where, you robbed a gas station. Let's say you had a gun and, well, not a gun necessarily, you kind of hit the cashier over the head, right? And they got knocked out and they were struggling to breathe. And I said, oh shit, and I run there, try to give him CPR.
Yeah.
Does that still make me guilty by association?
So say the first part of that again.
So we go to a gas station.
Yeah.
Both our good friends go to a gas station. You decide, okay, I need to go ahead and rob this thing. right? So we need some money. We're both having to come say, we need to make some money. You say, okay, I got it. I'm going to go in and rob this gas station. You go in, you try to get the money, and you knock the cashier over the head, right? They're spazzing out there.
By accident or on purpose?
Well, let's say there was a situation where you need to get out of there quickly and she was taking too long, and you might not purposely try to kill her or knock her out, but you want to like get the point, like, hey, you need to hurry the fuck up. And you hit her over the head. Let's say she starts spasming out, she starts having seizures. I run in there to try to save her.
Yeah.
Should I still be guilty by association?
So you run in, you're not the person who hit her.
I'm not the person here, but I'm associated with you.
You run in and you try and give her CPR.
Yeah.
Then no, I don't think you should be criminally liable, but I know that you will be. I know that you
exactly.
are.
And that's what I'm trying to get to. Like the guy that tried to save him or whatever. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, they need to judge these people, and that's where I would say absolutely correct. Like, you need to judge those two police officers the way that minorities and the poor and, you know, people without means basically are judged in America when committing these crimes, right? You need to judge them like that. But me personally, how I look at the situation personally, I'm like, the guy tried to turn him over. He was trying to be reasonable. This other officer was telling him, no, you know, don't do it. Just leave him as he is. And he was just following the authority of that officer, thinking he knew what he was doing because he was a less high-ranking police officer. Just the way I feel that if you're both robbing a shop and you decide to rob a shop and then the person shoots the guy or does something crazy and you say, hey, we didn't plan on doing that, like, and you try and help the person and you save their life, then I don't know, like, that should be taken into consideration in your punishment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. Like you don't get the same amount of jail time as the person who did the shooting. Or if somebody, you know, a lot of the time people force people to commit crimes, you know, in gangs. Hello?
I don't know what that was.
Did you hear a knock?
I heard something.
Was that from your side?
No, one on my side.
All right, I'm gonna check this out quickly. Yeah. That kind of stuff freaks me out. Sorry.
You good, man? Please go check that out.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Is not guilty for aiding, advising, hiring, counseling, conspiring, or otherwise procuring the commission of one of the charged crimes, unless that crime is actually committed. The defendant, the state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally aided another person in committing the charged crime. No crime is committed if a police officer's actions were justified by the police officer's use of reasonable force in the line of duty in effecting a lawful arrest or preventing an escape from custody. The kind and degree of force a police officer may lawfully use in executing his duty is limited by what a reasonable police officer in the same situation would believe to be necessary. Any use of force beyond that is not reasonable. To determine if the actions of the police officer were reasonable, you must look at those facts which a reasonable officer in the same situation would have known at the precise moment the officer acted with force. You must decide whether the officer's actions were objectively reasonable in light of the totality of the facts and circumstances confronting the officer, and without regard to the officer's own subjective state of mind, intentions, or motivations. The defendant
but not now.
If he used force,
later.
By law.
I'm busy.
To prove guilt, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's use of force was not authorized by law. You are the
Okay.
sole judges of whether a witness is to be believed and
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
There are no hard and fast rules to guide you in this regard. In determining believability and weight of testimony, you may take into consideration witness' interest or lack of interest in the case. Their manner, their age and experience, frankness and sincerity or the lack thereof, and the reasonableness or the unreasonableness of their
Yeah, that shit,
in
man.
light of all the other evidence in the case.
That shit freaks me out. What were we talking about before?
The two officers
Any other
that were
factors
with
appear
Chauvin.
on believability.
Should
Yeah,
they
no,
be
You should rely on the last analysis.
Yeah, no, as I was saying, personally, I believe you should be more humane about it. But you're right. If you're judging it by how people normally get judged, then
or calling is allowed to
they have to be convicted at the highest state of the law, because that is how people usually get judged.
Exactly. Like, it's like you have, when I hate to use this, but I'm about to use it.
And ability of the witness.
If you rape if you commit rape, right, pedophilia, and you go to trial, you should, a priest who commits pedophilia should not be exonerated or treated any differently than a regular, normal person, everyday person who commits pedophilia, right? And like I said, in that, another analogy, let's say we're in the office and we have a manager, right? We're under them, we're subordinate to them, and they are committing some form of sexual harassment to a female employee.
Yeah.
Should we not intervene because that's our manager?
We should intervene, but we shouldn't be convicted of the same crime if she goes to the cops or something. I mean, like, it's not unless we watched it happen or something and didn't do anything. I mean, and just continued working or something like that while she was being sexually assaulted and we could all see it in plain view. Then maybe we definitely have criminal responsibility. But if I'm not actually sure you do, actually, because I don't know if you've got criminal responsibility to, like, if you see a crime being committed or you see somebody in distress, medical distress or anything like that, I don't know you have to, by law, call the police in the United States or in the UK. I think you should have to, but I'm not sure that you do. Do you know what I mean? I think you should be criminally responsible for, like, hey, you see somebody stabbed on the street, as long as the person isn't there who stabbed them, as long as the person isn't there who stabbed them or shot them or something, then you should call the police or call the ambulance to say, get here immediately. And if you don't, and you're proven to not have done that, then I think you should be held criminally responsible. I mean, that being said, if you're the only person, right, who could do it. Yeah.
But on the flip side, like, say, if you stab the person, I'm with you, and you stab that person, I do nothing, I therefore should be criminally charged like you as an accessory, unless I prove otherwise.
Oh, if I stab someone and
I'm with you, kind of like that situation where you see, even though I'm a subordinate to Chauvin, what he's doing.
But what if I'm scared? What if you're scared? Am I the stabber or you're the stabber? I can't remember.
Okay, let's say, I'll be the bad guy this time. I'm the stabber.
You'll be the stabber this time.
Yeah.
What if I'm terrified of you? You just stabbed someone. I'm terrified of you. I don't, I'm scared you'll do it to me.
Well, you better get away and do something.
No, but I'm saying, should I be criminally liable even then?
Well, to me, I feel like you would have to prove that you are not liable because you were threatened for your life. You therefore may have to prove that you were threatened for life, or I was a threat to your life.
Well, you are a threat to my life because you stabbed someone. So obviously you're a threat to my life. You're a threat to everybody. But that's what I'm saying.
Law, you have to prove it.
In a court of law, that's what I'm saying, and I think that's wrong. right? If somebody stabs someone in front of you or shoots someone in front of you, obviously you're going to be fearful of your life. Yeah, anybody who's crazy enough to do shit like that. Now, it might be argued, well, why are you friends with this person? Why are you hanging out with this person even? But like, that surely you saw signs of this kind of behavior. Maybe it escalated. Then you could say, okay, well, now you've got some issues here, because clearly you ran in this person's circles. You saw him commit crimes before. So the fact that you continue to stay with him, now he's done something terrible and you're implicated in it because you didn't call an ambulance. You didn't try and help this person. You ran away with them and you know, basically, do you know what I mean? And protected them, right? So in that sense, yes. But if you really don't know a person is like that, and you can show that you know, you never saw him commit a crime, you never saw him do anything, you know, bad before, and he shoots someone, then yeah, I'm now terrified. I'm like, now, okay, I'm not calling the police because this guy might shoot me. I'm not helping the person because this guy might shoot me. I'm not, you know, even when I get home, I'm not calling the cops because I'm scared that this guy might. I can see that as, I wouldn't do that personally. That's not what I would do personally, but I can see that as an understandable defense. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is that for me is fair, right? And I think that applies to this case where you've got somebody who is directly in charge of you, who has seniority over you, doing a bad act, and you even try and tell him, hey, you're doing a bad act, maybe we shouldn't continue doing this, and he says, no, it's okay, and continues doing the bad act. That for me, in a perfect world where blacks and everybody were judged reasonably, that for me would be a justified, you know, like, because in human nature, we do follow leadership, we follow authority. That's proven fact. If somebody with more authority tells us to continue doing something, we usually continue doing it.
That is true.
You know, there's been experiments all around this, you know, where there was like a psychologist who set up a room where doctors were telling people to electrocute somebody. And even though they were screaming in pain, they continued to electrocute them because the doctor said, and only a few people didn't do it. You know, most people, and these were moral people saying, hey, man, it sounds like this guy is really in anguish. I don't know if we should keep doing this. And they said, don't worry, it's okay. The doctor said, don't worry, it's okay. And they continued doing it. So again, you know, I think in this situation, that kind of parallels that, where you have somebody in authority telling somebody to do a bad act. Are they as criminally responsible? I'm not saying they shouldn't get any charge, or they shouldn't get fired and lose their pension, and you lose, you know, and never be allowed on the police force again. All of those kind of things I think should happen. But are they criminally responsible in the way Derek Chauvin, and I believe that Asian cop was criminally responsible as well. I think you can bring him into it as well, because that guy, he needs to be charged for something. I don't even know what it is. For being a dick, he should be charged for being a.
There's almost
dick.
like
There should be a
tell everybody back up while he does his act. You know, that's what it almost looked like. You know, and it's like, and I agree with you. Like there should be some trials, some charges should be brought. Maybe not to extreme as Chauvin's, but there should be something, right? And as far as the lady that shot the right guy, I don't know how things working there, but I know where I'm from. Usually the gun is on one side and the taser's on the other.
Yeah, no.
And you just, for the experience that she has, she should have known what was her gun, what was her taser.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And It's, and I say this a lot, especially with the younger people that I usually talk to. We can't put ourselves in positions to where we get those end results, right? Because we can always say, had he just complied, that wouldn't have happened. That's usually the consensus.
Well,
Right?
I mean, the only thing you can say is, had he complied, if he was still killed, then you can say that absolutely it wasn't his fault. That's the best thing you can do. Like, you can point to that and say, look, he complied. And I understand this, like, you know, from the mentality, because look, from my point of view, either I resist or I don't resist. If I resist, I'm likely to die. If I don't resist, then there's a good chance I could die in America. Not like a very big chance, but there's a good chance you could. And the likelihood is you're more likely to be brutalized or roughed up or something like that rather than actually killed, statistically speaking, right? But there's a possibility. There's more of a possibility if I resist. Much more of a possibility if I resist. If I don't resist, there's just a possibility of, you know, as I said, you may get roughed up, you may be put on the ground, you may be handcuffed in a way that's very painful to your wrists, you know, all of that kind of thing. But you know, the problem is that in those two scenarios where there's both of them have a possibility where you might die. The good thing, not the good thing, but the only thing that can come out of not resisting is if something terrible does really go down and it's caught on camera, it's caught on body camera, and, you know, then at the very, very least, it will show that you didn't resist. They just fucking killed you, right? And they can't talk about anything, right? They can't talk about what you did. You know, you didn't resist and you got killed. That's it. Same with, well, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so yeah, let's go ahead and, well, I'm gonna finish that real quick. In this, it's one of those situations where you have all the years on the police force. You should know better, right? And of course, on the outside looking in, no, we were in that position where we have done the same thing, right? In that high tension type of situation, would we have pulled out a gun thinking it was our taser and done the same thing?
No.
Okay, so especially we've never been in that position. But for her, who's been on the force, well, over 20 years, I think, there's no excuse. There's just no excuse.
Well, I don't think it's about no excuse. People are fallible and people can make mistakes, but like life and death mistakes, you know.
Yeah.
You know, sorry, love. That's the risk you put yourself at if you're being in the police force. That if you make a life or death choice and it was an accident and it leads to someone's death, then, you know, you may not have done it on purpose. You may not have been in your soul or mind or your intention, but the outcome is that person has died. And, you know, I'm somebody who always holds intentions over you know, outcome, but that's not the way the law looks at it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I judge people by their intentions. I don't judge them by the outcome of an action, right?
Okay.
So if their intention was good, then I will be like, okay, I can see your intention was good. It ended up badly, but this is what you need to learn from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I know a lot of people just judge people by the outcome, right? They don't care about what the person's intentions were. So for me, someone like this cop, I would want to look at her history. I'd want to look what she's done on the police force, how she's acted with the community. Has she got a good rapport with you know, the community that she polices? All of those factors I would take into regard when saying, was this really an accident, completely unintentional, heat of the moment situation, or or was this something else? And then I would take the thing of this is happening to too many black people as something else apart from that, apart from how I'm judging her. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's still happening to too many black people. It probably wouldn't have happened to him if he wasn't black, but that isn't why she did it. That's just part of the systematic bullshit that she's part of.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you have any response before I play?
For me, it's hard to see. Intentions are very hard to just go by, right? Because now I do agree, like if she has a good rapport with the areas that she polices and has no history of, doesn't have the history that we see that Chauvin has, then yes, you can consider that. But you are police officers, right? It goes back to why our police officers treated differently in court as opposed to regular people.
Yeah.
Right. And as a police officer, you are held at a different standard. Well, you should be anyway. And for me, going out there with a taser, thinking it was a taser, pulling out a gun, shooting somebody, that's one thing. But as a police officer, no, you are held at a different standard.
I understand.
Therefore, you should be judged by that standard, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that the first thing she wanted to do was quit. It's like, look, you just killed somebody. Don't you want to make amends? Don't you want to do any of that? Like, what? It's, look, I think, then you have a child as well. So a child lost their father. A mother and father lost their son. It saddens me and it angers me because these things constantly happen. And we've seen cases, similar incidences where there were white individuals who actually fought back at the police officers and they were humanely arrested.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm not trying to, as I said, it's happening to too many black people. Right? So I'm not trying to excuse the system because I think the system is what led them to approach that young black man in the first place. Right? I think the system is what did that. I don't think there was no reason like for them to stop him in the first place, right? I don't think that he.
Well, something about his tags, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but like, and then did he have a weapon in the end? I don't think he had a weapon on him, right? Like in his car or anything. Do we know that?
I don't think so either.
Yeah. So again, too many unarmed black men are being killed in this way, shot or using force on them. So the thing that people are arguing is, what would it have been so bad to just let him drive away and catch up with him later, because they knew his details, they knew who he was.
And a similar thing happened in Atlanta. You remember where the guy was at a Wendy's, he was drunk or something, and he fought two police officers, and the police officer shot him in the back. Yeah. This happened in Atlanta last year, I think. And
oh right, I know, I saw that one as well. But he grabbed their taser as well. Like he
grabbed the taser, but we've seen incidences with white individuals with the similar situation and who were humanely arrested. And it's and
but aren't there situations with black people who get in those situations and they're humanely arrested? Isn't that then just that the cop hasn't got good enough training to deal with the situation?
Well, then again, how many times we're going to have that excuse? How many times can they use that excuse to say, well, we didn't have enough training. We didn't have enough training. Like, then what? Then why are you out on the streets?
Yeah.
Why are you out there?
No. What I don't mean like enough training. What I mean is that you're saying that we've seen situations where white people have been in a similar circumstances and not been, shot, basically. But when it's a black person, but I'm just trying to say we need to be careful about that, because ultimately, if there have been black people who've been arrested peacefully under the same circumstances as that man, then that just shows that it's that police officer that has the problem, not a systematic thing like every single time a black person does that they're going to be shot, right?
Yeah.
It's still a rarity what happened to that guy. Do you know what I mean? Like that police officers, generally speaking, will not shoot somebody for. I don't know this. I'm just saying that I'm asking the question. Like, you'd have to look at it statistically. That, you know, of all the times police officers get their tasers grabbed, how many of them shoot? What race are the individuals who they shoot at? You know, more often than not, or is it equal? You know, is it that some white people they're reasonable with, some white people they're unreasonable with? Depends on the cop. You know, do you know what I mean? All of those kind of factors you need to take before you can reach a kind of conclusion of, you know, about whether or not it was reasonable. I'm gonna stop this stream and then start a new stream, if you don't mind, because cool. I'm just gonna call this a discussion. Cool. You know, pre-closing argument discussion. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna end this stream now.
Okay. Cool. Now I'm going to punish her because she's about to go crazy.
I'm gonna put it back on and watch the rest of the trial with you.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to keep it like this is quite a long stream. All right. So thanks very much, guys. We're gonna come back and watch the closing arguments now, because we've had our discussion, pre-closing argument discussion. All right. Bye.